if you've been watching us previously, I am happy to introduce Marty and Karen here today. Both of them has been on our show previously. And ladies first, so Karen, would you like to do a brief introduction of yourself?
I'm Karen Walsh, and I'm an emeritus faculty at Thunderbird School of Global Management. And now I am in a consulting business with my husband, Paul Kinzinger, and it's called Clairvoyant Leadership.
Thank you, Karen. Marty?
My name is Marty Latz. I'm the founder of Latz Negotiation. I taught for a number of years at the law school at Arizona State, and I now teach and train business people and lawyers how to more effectively negotiate, both in the U.S. as well as abroad. I've also written a couple of books on negotiation, and I just love talking about this subject.
Yeah, thank you both. And thank you for taking the time coming. Now, one of the many reasons that I thought it would be a great idea having you guys on board again is, as you just said, Marty, all of us here are authors, and all of us are authors within the topic and in the area of negotiation. Now, I've been provoking a lot of people. I've done that with so many things, but one of the things I've been provoking people with, I'm very good at that, obviously. But one of the things that really annoys people is when I'm claiming that getting to yes was a failure. And obviously, Getting to Yes, for those that don't know the book, is probably the book or the first book that really made it big within negotiation. Published more than 30 years ago, it's the first one that actually try and create some kind of framework. And the reason I claim the book is a failure is not because the book by itself is not good. It's actually very good. But I see so many clients that I meet that have read the book and the book is on the bookshelf. They're not using any of the content. What's your guys' opinion about that when I say Getting to Yes was a failure? Karen?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a failure. I think maybe there's two elements that I've often thought about regarding that book. One is that for its time, it really was a jump forward to take us from just positional bargaining to interest-based. And we see that today. A lot of work is all about the why today, so that they were really on to something there. The other is if people are not actually practicing positional versus interest-based, they're really not going to have much movement. Which then leads me to the other thing that I would say it wasn't a failure, but it was ahead of its time, because now we have a lot of science that is explaining why the why is such a powerful thing. That's a good point. And that's what I think, that the sciences have really informed us a lot about why the why is so important and how difficult it is, because we generally want to move to the what first.
But Marty, if Karen is right in her point that the book was ahead of its time, would you agree or disagree with me that I still see a lot of people who are reading the book today, but still not using the content or the ideas of the book?
Well, I would agree that there are a number of people in businesses that read the book, that teach the book, that don't practice and implement the book. But I think you have to evaluate, if you're going to evaluate Getting to Yes as a success or failure, you have to take a look at what Roger Fisher and Bill Urey, the co-authors of that book, were intending to accomplish when they published the book. I don't think they were trying to transform everyone in every negotiation into an interest-based problem-solving negotiation approach. I think what they were trying to do was to create an environment where people, actually start to think strategically about the process. So they actually start to look at the research. Sure. They start to transform their ideas based on what the research says. I think they accomplished that goal. And you can take a look at the negotiation industry that Getting to Yes in effect spawned since it was first published in 1981, and you would say, yeah, it's a success. It created an industry where people now teach and train and at least try to implement those concepts. Right. The second thing I would say is, if you talk to Roger Fisher today, and obviously he's passed away, a number of years ago now, I don't think that his goal was to take all the people who do positional bargaining and make them into interest-based bargaining. I think he had a much more sophisticated understanding of how it is that a lot of people negotiate. I think he recognized that there was, and still is today, a lot of people that use positional bargaining, and positional bargaining can be very, very successful and effective in certain instances. But he was trying to say, hey, the default should not just be positional bargaining. The default should be, what is your goal? Do you care about a future relationship? Because if you do, don't just default to positional bargaining. Take a more sophisticated approach, analyze and evaluate the why, the interest base, then you can make some strategic decisions as to what you can do. If you take those two goals as their really intended outcomes, I would say it's actually been quite a success.
Marty, that leads me on to another question. That is the future of negotiation. I meet a lot of clients and individuals specifically who are a little bit nervous about their own role, their own position because of technology. I have a lot of clients within procurement specifically, and they are very concerned, will there be a procurement department 5 or 10 years from now? Will technology have replaced the actual individual during that negotiation? How do you see negotiation, not necessarily only in relation to technology, but in general, how do you see that 10 years from now?
I would say that we've been negotiating for millennia. We're going to be negotiating for millennia. Negotiation is not going to be replaced by technology, but I do think that technology is going to augment our role as negotiators, and it will hopefully empower us to be more effective in our negotiations. As you know, I also do a lot of work with folks in procurement and purchasing and sales, and our challenge is to use technology to transform what we do and how we do it, and not view it as something to be afraid of in the workplace. It's hard. What we do is exceedingly hard, and the more I teach and train people how to more effectively negotiate, the more I realize how difficult it is, because we're trying to change people's behavior.
Sure.
Technology can help. It should help. But it's never going to replace the fundamental human dynamic in how we engage.
Yeah. Karen, do you see we negotiate differently today than we did in 81?
Oh, I think so. I think we do. And I think technology is a big part of that. Something that we were involved in for many years was how can you have a much more systematic way to think about negotiation and think more systematically about the relationship. If the relationship doesn't matter, then we really need to be really good at positional bargaining. So I think this is a interesting time to be in terms of the way we've changed from 81, where we were just training to have fun with negotiation. Now it's much more strategic, much more systematic. And on the technology side, I've been working with a former T-Bird student who has a analytic business in India. And what they're doing is taking the big data and looking at ways now they can help vendors in the procurement world to understand that the relationships matter and that they can use the analytics to build better relationships.
And the data supports that,
yes,
right?
Exactly. And the data is supporting it. So it's very interesting because the smartnership method that you use is something that fits really well into that area, that they can see that they can work together to capture a lot of lost value. So now we've got all the analytics that can actually help. So it's not technology versus the human, it's how do we use the data to help the humans find those areas where they don't have to fight, but that they actually create something new.
Right.
So I think that's really interesting.
And I would add just one thing, that if you would talk to people who are in procurement 20, 30 years ago, they were basically order takers, right? Someone say, buy X, they would go to the store, they would buy X, right? There wasn't any real strategy behind it. In the last 20, 30 years, I think you've seen procurement change into a much more strategic world, because it used to be that the salespeople were driving all the revenue in corporations. Now the CEOs and the CFOs and the C-level executives are recognizing and understanding that procurement can have an equally beneficial impact on their bottom line. And so they become much more strategic.
Yep.
They're going to get the opportunity to use technologies, just like Salesforce has transformed the sales environment. You also see similar technology transforming procurement. But again, you're not going to ever change salespeople. They're still going to be out there doing it. I think equally as powerfully, procurement people are going to be out there negotiating.
And I just wanted to mention that is one of the keys that they're finding in this kind of data analytics. When you take those analytics and take it to the CEO, then you've got the CEO involved in procurement, and it's not a sales transactional thing. It's actually a strategic decision to move forward.
As it should be.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I was reading a very interesting study the other day that claimed that we're less fact-based today than ever before. So partly because of social media, everybody's just expressing their own opinion and feelings and ideas. That is less based on fact than has ever been before. I was just wondering.
Is that because of Trump?
I can't say. The study didn't mention Trump in this case. But I was actually wondering, do you think that would have an effect in negotiation as well? Because, argumentation obviously could be a part of any negotiation. Do you think that the less fact-based negotiation could have a negative impact on outcome, where people are just expressing their own feelings and emotions and idea, less than focusing on what's real? Marty?
I think that it certainly does, and I would actually introduce Trump as having an impact in this particular area. I mean, when I wrote my book, The Real Trump Deal, an eye-opening look at how he really negotiates, you find that if you make up facts, or if you don't have a common understanding of facts, that it does transform and change the negotiation environment. It changes the extent to which, as we were talking about before, the impact of the relationship. It changes trust. It changes credibility. Now, it's not to diminish the impact of emotions and feelings and how we engage on a psychological level. That obviously is something we've discussed before, has a very significant impact on it. But you have to have a basic understanding of facts, of data, of how you engage. How many of this are you going to buy? Well, if there's no understanding of that, you can't figure out a volume discount. You can't figure out whether or not you want a renewal term. You can't figure out whether or not you want to have some other element in the process. And that's very dangerous to get away from some fact-based interaction.
Yeah. But why is it, and I can ask you, Karen, that question, why is it that we seem to, as society, to accept in general that information is less fact-based and just based on emotions and feelings?
Because we're human.
Okay, well, that's a good answer.
It's a very human phenomenon.
Yeah.
And this is what we've done forever. And right now we're overwhelmed with information and facts, and the facts are wrong or they're misdirected. So I see that this is an important time for us who really want to have more strategic, systematic, fact-based negotiations, working hand in hand with all the things that we're learning about this social and emotional psychological intelligence. It's an important time.
I would add just one thing to that, Keld, which is on the fact side, we've lost our gatekeepers that have in the past given those facts credibility. We used to have just 3 major networks, and yes, we could trust Dan Rather or Brian Williams to suggest 2 people who've had problems with facts, but who historically, they were the gatekeepers. With the internet, with everything out there, as Karen said, we are so overwhelmed that we now have a problem having some basic agreement on facts, and that is really problematic in a negotiation environment.
Basic agreement on the facts. That's really interesting.
In the early part of many negotiations, of course, is an information bargaining phase. I'm trying to get information from you, you're trying to get information from me, but if I can't trust or if I can't independently verify the information that you're sharing with me or I'm sharing with you, then we're going to be talking at cross purposes, and it's going to be really problematic.
Marty, could you share with us very briefly how you described Trump's negotiation behavior related to fact or lack of fact in a negotiation?
Well, one of the things that Donald Trump, on a consistent basis since the late 70s, early 80s, actually implemented was he found that the media, and in this case it was it wasn't the social media, it was the gossip-based media in New York, is when he would say something numerous times, or he would pretend to be an independent third party and feed it to the press, that all of a sudden that became reality for his development. So he said, for instance, at one point that Princess Di and Prince Charles were looking at buying a whole floor in Trump Tower. Well, he leaked it to a member of the press using a pseudonym that everyone now, at the time probably and now, knew was really Donald Trump. They reported it, and that created an environment where people, I want to be in the same building as royalty, and that created a reality that he used in his negotiations to sell apartments in Trump Tower. And he perceived then, and I think perceived throughout his entire business career, that if he could create what were perceived as facts from a negotiation or a sales perspective, that redounded back to his benefit, whether it was true or not. Now,
Yeah.
ultimately, because he did this consistently, because people finally realized he did this consistently, he burned so many bridges in relationships with banks, with customers, with subcontractors, that it became far more expensive and difficult for him to get deals done and to get trusted partners. And we've actually seen that also since he became president, because he's used that same, it's almost as if he didn't learn any of these lessons, or he perceived that it worked, even though the objective facts would say that it didn't, financially or otherwise. And he's continued to do it as president. And
Right.
we've seen that have a negative impact on our relationship with Mexico, with Canada,
Sure.
with Germany,
Yeah.
and with members of Congress.
Yeah. So are you saying, Marty, that he's using it as a kind of a bluff strategy, or is he willing to go through with whatever threat he's bringing up?
He's done both.
Okay.
He's done both. So, which makes it particularly challenging, because he perceives that his unpredictability and his perceived irrationality is a good thing from a negotiation perspective. It may be in a one-off transaction, but it is not on a long-term basis. If you're dealing with a member of Congress and you make a promise as to what you're going to do for them in the future in order to get their vote on issue A, and then you don't follow through, or if they don't believe that you're going to follow through, you're never going to get that deal in the first place. And he's run into that problem now again and again in his 2.5 years as president.
Because it is a political environment.
Because it's a political environment, they have to deal with each other, whether they like it or not. They're involved in a relationship, and it matters. And you burn those bridges, and it becomes problematic. In fact, to such an extent that in his negotiations over the healthcare overhaul, the repeal and replace of Obamacare, he got it through the House. It's in the Senate. He sends down his chief of staff at the time, Reince Priebus, to meet with the Senate Republican caucus. We're going to meet to strategize as to how to get it passed. The Senate Republican caucus refused to let the White House chief of staff into the room to even listen to what they were talking about. That was how counterproductive they felt his effort would be,
Counterproductive.
because he had burned so many bridges with his own fellow Republican members of the U.S. Senate.
Interesting. Karen, I often get a question, and that is from people that kind of recognize that they could improve their negotiation skills, regardless what level they might be at. I often get a question, how can I do that? How can I actually make myself better? How can I improve my knowledge within this field? And obviously, as I said earlier, all of us are authors within the field, so we would probably all say, well, buy my book, that will help you. But besides that, have you got any recommendation for people that would like to improve their negotiation skills?
Well, I think this is an interesting area of research that I've been looking at a lot recently. And there is some hard data on this now, that not only the reading is useful, but the actual practice. We all know practice matters, and we did this forever in our courses, role plays, and then you get a grade. But the level and the kind of feedback is what we're finding is the differentiator. So we're learning in the world from coaching. What are the things that are done in coaching that actually help with development of new skills and new behaviors on executive level? So just one example, I'm working with Sarah Schwab, who is another T-Bird, has an organization, an ed tech company called the Experience Accelerator. And in that program, you read and then you practice on a video camera and you give yourself feedback. Then you practice with a live tutor, and then you get some feedback, and then you go back and look at your feedback with your video. And we've been measuring that, and there's a 40 to 80% improvement in the skills that people are finding.
Right.
So I guess what we're finding in the research around this is it's practice, but then it's a particular kind of feedback, and it's a particular kind of reflection. And I think we tried to do this a lot in our courses with reflection, but the level of reflection really has impact in terms of paying attention to what I said or I thought I was going to say and I didn't. And why was that?
Yeah,
I find that fascinating.
I think that's fascinating as
Yeah.
well. I would add that there's a couple of steps that we have found incorporating that research, I think that really helps change behavior. One, you need knowledge, right? You need to read the book. You need to understand the research, the data. Two, I would add to it, you need to do a strategic, what I call a strategic negotiation plan that puts in practice what you've read, what you understood, that applies it to your negotiation. So the research says, what is your goal? You need to not just think about your goal, you need to write down your goal. You need to figure out what are the interests versus positions. You need to figure out what is my plan B, what is your plan B in terms of leverage. You need to implement it. Planning, strategic planning is crucial. Then you're right, practice matters, no question about it. And then that reflection stage. And I think in the reflection stage, I 100% agree with Karen. It's got to be self-reflection. It's got to be reflection with maybe a coach or a consultant. Boy, if you've got people who are willing to videotape and look at it, that's a transformative way of changing behavior. I've had a lot of instances where if I do coaching, they say, oh yeah, I understand the difference between open-ended questions and closed-ended questions. Yeah, you need to use open-ended questions. But then I watch them do a negotiation or we videotape it, and you go over their videotape negotiation, and you say, okay, that's a closed-ended question, that's a closed-ended question, that's a closed-ended question. They
Can't believe you did it.
They can't believe it. But the videotape doesn't lie. And with technology today now where you can do that relatively easily, and boy, if you can have an expert coach like Karen or you, Keld, doing that, I mean, that can be a huge game changer for negotiation effectiveness.
And remember the study we did by doing the systematic planning, and we were really isolating just on planning in those days. And we found
Had almost a 20% difference in result.
Exactly, right.
Just from
planning,
the planning.
Right. Wow. We had control groups on that, and we could actually see the difference because we could measure the value of the outcome.
Right, and the outcome was a quantitative outcome, so you could measure the difference between those who planned and those who just, so you had knowledge from both sides, but then one group did systematic discipline planning, the other group just took that knowledge and tried to apply it, and the group that did systematic discipline planning had up to I think it was 17.5%, close to 20% of a difference in a complex quantitative-based negotiation. Pretty extraordinary differential.
Karen, I have a very difficult question for you. That is, if you should recommend a book, and it can't be ours and it can't be your own, what book on the topic of negotiation would you recommend to our viewers?
Right now, I would recommend something that's just come out in the press, Oxford Press, called Nurturing Humanity, How Domination and Partnership Shape Our Brains and Our Future, written by Riane Eisler, who has done a lot of anthropological work and has looked historically that we have historically known how to do partnership. And somehow with our technology, somehow with our hierarchical structures, that we have let domination become the archetype for getting things done or being successful. But it's always been a theme, and it's absolutely critical that we learn partnership. So I think this is a very important book today and a theme today, because if we really are going to move into a place where we really can create something new in a very short period of time, we need to understand how partnership works.
Sure.
And that sounds pretty basic, pretty simple, but we are structurally, systemically acculturated every day around domination, and we see it every day in our negotiations. Even if you systematically plan, you hope to build the partnership, we will behave because we have these larger structures that have neurologically been shaped. And because our brains are elastic, we can really manage that.
Yeah, the neuroscience is fascinating.
There's so much being learned about this today.
So what the book is really claiming is that we kind of forgot the skill, the art of...
Yeah, we all have that skill, right. And neurologically, we're finding out that we know we're more neurologically connected anyway. We just forgot. Yes, so...
Thanks for that advice. Yeah. Marty?
I'm going to go in a different direction. In fact, I'm going to go back to the classic book by our now former colleague here at ASU, Robert Cialdini, who wrote Influence, Science, and Practice, which really, I think, defined for us. It's not a strictly negotiation book, but it's 100% applicable to what we teach, because it really focuses on the psychological underpinnings of how we act and react as humans in most negotiation environments. And I think it transformed my way of thinking when I came out of law school and really helped me understand how we as humans behave. It's a little bit on the older side now, but I still think it's as applicable today as it was when it was originally published.
Right. Karen, just to wrap up, if you should give an advice to our viewers on one skill they could focus on their own to improve their ability to negotiate, what skill do you think that would be?
I think non-judgment would be the primary skill. It would help with all of these things we've been talking about, kind of that rapid cognition we have to just judge before we just listen and before we totally understand what the facts are or what somebody really needs, and more importantly, what I need.
Is that related to another study I read recently that actually claims that we've moved more into the camp of I'm right and you're wrong and I'm not even listening to whatever you're saying? Is that it? Because the study actually claimed that has gotten worse as well.
Yeah, exactly. For all the reasons we've been talking about here. And because we are human, that is a very human response when we're overwhelmed and there's too many options and I don't know where to go. The first thing is to stop. It's like slowing down. Non-judgment, and then observe, and then be aware, and then be able to behave.
And how do you do that?
Meditate. Just sit quietly. Just sit quietly.
Right. I completely agree with you, but I think it might be harder than just doing it right, isn't it?
Of course. That's why there's big business today in slowing down.
Take the time.
Yeah, and it doesn't cost much except your own anxiety.
No, I get it. That's a
it's interesting because I was with a group last week in Japan, and it was a global group, extremely busy, always flying, always traveling, and part of what they really wanted was a moment to slow down.
That was real value to them. That was just slowing down
to them, right? And we did one improv technique, the yes and technique. Just how much you tend to always say no to somebody, or you tend to say but to somebody. So just practicing a yes and with a partner for even just a little while, they said helped slow them down.
Can you come in and help my 14-year-old slow down and get off his devices?
That would help too.
That would help too.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck.
I need it.
Marty, one skill that you would pass on? What would be the skill from you that you would advise people should focus on?
Strategic planning. Strategic planning. Obviously works in conjunction with what Karen said.
Exactly. Right.
Slowing down. Take the time. How many times have we been sitting at our desk, the telephone rings, we look at the caller ID, it's our counterpart in the negotiation, we pick up the phone, what do? We jump right in. Of course, the caller has the advantage. We haven't thought about what we want to talk about. We haven't thought about any of the things that we teach. Tell them you'll call them back, right? Do a little strategic planning. You're going to be far more empowered to accomplish your goals and get the right results if you just take a little bit of time and do it. By the way, most of our colleagues recommend that we spend at least twice as much time planning for the at-the-table negotiation than actually doing it. But of course, we fail on a consistent basis to do that.
What would your advice be, Keld?
It's a very good question, actually. I would basically go with what both of you are saying, preparation. And I know it sounds like a cheap advice, but preparation is really it. And that is covering what you are saying as well, Karen. I completely agree with that. And your planning issue as well, I would completely go with that as well. Because, I find often that the preparation time that people take before an actual negotiation is the travel time they have from their own office to the counterpart's office, right? So you're hoping that there's a little bit of a trip so they will have some time to prepare themselves because they just do it, and it's sometimes I'm sitting there wondering with that amount of value and money and importance they're going to negotiate.
How could they just wing it?
Exactly. It's scary. So, but obviously we could do a whole show just talking about what is a good skill and what is it we need to focus on. So, right. Anything you want to say at the very end before we wrap up? Anything, Marty, that you think could be golden for our viewers in general?
You know, I finish every single one of my programs with 2 what I call pearls of wisdom. And perhaps I'll share those today if it's all right. Number 1 goes back to what we were talking about. Prepare, prepare, prepare. The legendary UCLA basketball coach, John Wooden, said, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. But don't just prepare on the substance. We've spent our time here, we've spent our lives researching, studying, teaching, training people to strategically prepare based on the experts' proven research. Second thing I would recommend that works 100% of the time, you can't say that about many strategies, protect and preserve your reputation. Your reputation as an honest, ethical, credible, professional negotiator, not only is it the right way to negotiate, not only is it the ethical way to negotiate, it's also, of course, the most effective way to negotiate.
Right. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I like to end with the 3 ground rules of improv. There are no right or wrong answers. Remember, no right or wrong answers. Help your partner look good, and always have some fun.
Well, that's some great advice we got right there. That's
Like
worth
we
a
had
fortune.
today.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Well, Karen, thanks a million for taking the time.
Thank
And
you.
Same to you, Marty. I enjoyed it. It was wonderful having you guys here.
Thank you
you.
for the opportunity.